Dr. Sharif Abdullah offers a unique, hopeful, and visionary perspective on the persistent challenges of our time. His perspective is shaped by his urban upbringing of poverty and violence, his Ivy League education, and his work with impacted communities in America and in 45 countries around the world. His spiritual outlook is rooted in the consciousness of dozens of religions, faith traditions, and spiritual practices. Sharif offers this unique viewpoint, helping us chart a course that explains where we've been, where we are now, and how we get to a positive future that works for all living beings.
Hello, Sharif here, and today I want to talk to you about doing the right thing and why that's so hard. Before I get started, I want to recommend to you that you, if you like this video, hit the like button, let everybody else know you like it, and subscribe to the channel because this is the way we can stay in contact with you. Okay, so we'll get started. There's some people out here who are saying, I want to make the change. I want to help make the change. I want to do the right thing. And when they do that, they run right into the brick wall of breaker consciousness because they're trying to change the conditions before the consciousness changes. I want to give you a few examples of that right now. One of the examples has to do with homelessness. And just to show you that I'm not, that the problems that we have exist beyond homelessness, I'm going to give you a very middle class to upper middle class issue of breaker consciousness. So first is the issue of homelessness. Just recently got information about a homeless encampment here in Portland that has been existing for a few years. It is self-regulating. It is self-policing. It's called Hazelnut Grove, and I've put the URL for a 6-minute video for that down in the comments section. It's people who don't want to have anything to do with drugs, don't want to have anything to do with alcohol, don't want to be living on the streets, and want to be self-sufficient. So they built for themselves some alternative housing, and that's decent, safe, secure, and because they're doing this on their own, they've come into conflict with the neighborhood that they're in. The homeless situation in Portland is so huge that it's in all of the neighborhoods. So the neighborhood, with typical breaker consciousness, says, we want those people to go. And the city, in typical breaker consciousness, says, oh, well, you're homeowners, you're voters, you have a stable home so you can vote. So we're just going to move them somewhere else. And that's the consciousness that we have even when the problem is being resolved. I don't want to see it. You remember from the Seattle video, the people were freaking out because of the people who are using drugs, the people who are alcoholic on the streets, bizarre behavior, etc. These are reasonably sane individuals who are struggling to keep themselves clean and sober, and not only are they getting no help from the city is burdening them by saying, you have to move. Cities have been saying you have to move to homeless people for 100 years or more. There's no place to move to. And that's the problem. And instead of the homeowners coming together and saying, let's figure out how you can live here and we can live here at the same time. It's like, no, just go away and you go somewhere. As long as that mentality exists, as long as you have that mentality, the problems will continue to exist. When you go to the homeowner association and the homeless encampment and say, let's sit down and talk together, then the problem starts to go away. Let me give you another example of this. And again, this is from the middle class to upper class level. I did a speaking engagement at a church some years ago, and in my talk to the church, I was saying to people, you have to do something. You can't just continue to live your very comfortable lives. This is a very comfortable church. You can't continue to live your very comfortable lives and think that you're not involved with the problem and think that you're not involved with the solution. A couple years later, I went back to the church and I gave a talk. And these people came up to me at the end of my talk and they said, when you were here a couple of years ago for the first time, we were very impressed by what you said. And we said afterwards that we were going to make a change in our lives in such a way that we're making, the world a more inclusive, a more visionary, a more future-oriented place. And they said, we immediately ran headlong into 2 years of obstacles. Said all we wanted to do was put solar panels on our house to generate electricity and to generate hot water. We would be living more off the grid than we are now. And we would be using solar panels where we would be lowering our carbon footprint, doing good for the earth, etc. And the first hurdle we ran into was the homeowners association that said solar panels are ugly. And now where they got that from, who knows? The next hurdle they ran into was the city council. Solar panels are illegal inside the city that they were in, which is not Portland, but one of the cities surrounding Portland. And then they ran into the building codes, and then they said, we just kept saying over and over, why is it so hard to do the right thing? Now, the good thing about this is that their efforts help to make it easier for the next person coming up in line to do the right thing. The next person coming up to do the right thing. But it's really hard for those of us who are creating the change right now. The second thing I want to talk to you about today is about some cool looking dome homes that I came across. A guy in Thailand is designing them, a unique architectural design and a unique engineering solution to them. I'm putting the URL to his video down in the comment section. It's really interesting, and it's really, really cheap. City of Portland right now is paying $120,000 to build housing for homeless people per unit. At that cost, you could build 10 of these dome units for about the same cost and house a lot more people. The reason that they're doing it that way is that in their concept, remember I said the problem is consciousness. In their consciousness, a house looks a certain way. In their consciousness, a house functions a certain way. And in order to give you the house that has the right look, the right function, the right white picket fence in the front, it's going to cost $120,000 a person, and that's why they say they don't have a solution to housing. With those assumptions in mind, you're not going to ever solve the problem. The problem will continue to grow faster than you can solve it. When you go in the other direction and ask the question, what is decent, safe, sanitary, and uplifting for people, regardless of what it looks like, you're going to come up with some really innovative designs and some really innovative ways that we can pull things together. It'll be a whole lot cheaper, and it will help the people who want and need the housing can help to build it. This is muscle power. You don't need a whole lot of engineering skills to build those domes. This does a couple of things. First of all, takes the cost of the housing way down. The second thing it does is it builds a sense of value, a sense of worth, a sense of self-sufficiency for the people who are coming off the streets. We're not just putting a roof over someone's head. The roof is not the problem. The problem is an entire system that robs us of our humanity, robs us of our sense of self-worth, robs us of our sense of being in touch with and in control of our own future. So our challenge is, how do we balance that? How do we make that happen in a way that that people can feel good about where they're staying, even though where they're staying may be smaller than an average size house. I mean, who needs to live in a house as big as an average size house? As one of the things that I think is important here is that if you start building those houses, those dome houses, you're going to find people who are not poor, who are not homeless, who would be really interested in living in them. I would be really interested in building one for myself and living in one. And so you have a whole different possibility of how we get housed coming up. And that's when you run head into the problem. The assumptions that are holding us back from our own future. The assumption that this structure has to meet code. The housing codes were made 100 years ago, 120 years ago, 150 years ago, back when we thought about our lives in a completely different way. We acted like resources were inexhaustible. We acted like everybody could afford to live in a house, and we acted like if you couldn't afford to live in a house, you were a bad person. That housing code is crystallized consciousness. It's the crystallized consciousness of 100 years ago. We're trying to fit a 21st century reality into a 19th century structure. It doesn't work. We also build housing based on this idea that I have to be in control of you. This is the epitome of breaker thinking. We're not going to ask the poor person, we're not going to ask the homeless person, what is it that would make you, would expand your horizons? What would empower you? What would make you self-sufficient? We're not going to ask them anything. We're going to tell them what to do, because everybody knows that poor people and homeless people are stupid, dumb, and ignorant. Now, once I let go of that consciousness, the breaker consciousness that looks at others and say, you are separate and different from me. Once we let go of that consciousness, we can start seeing the world in a very, very different way. We can start looking toward the people who are caught in the problem, not as causing the problem, but by being trapped in a problem that all of us have the interest in getting out of. Another assumption that we make is that everyone in the system, on this side of the system, all of the so-called supporters, all the so-called givers, have to make money from the system. So we build housing the way that we do so that everybody in the process can continue to be making the money that they've been making. What happens if we change that story so that a person can build their own house, so that a person can save money on the process of building the house? We don't need developers doing this, that we don't need, we can have a different level of skilled trades coming up to do this work. What happens when we change the assumption about poor people and about homeless people being bad, being the problem, being stupid, being lazy, being drug addicted? What happens when we change all that and recognize that they're people? And yes, some of them are crazy, and some middle-class people are crazy too. A whole lot of rich people are crazy too. What happens if we all just recognize that together we collectively have this problem, and together, collectively, we have the solution? I think that things can change. We'll be talking more about this in the next video. One of the things I want to do, again, before I leave, is remind you to hit the like button, to hit the subscribe button. And I want you to do that because it doesn't cost anything. It doesn't cost you anything. And it lets other people out there know that there are a whole lot of thinking people out here in the world who are really working on finding the solutions to the problem.
You are invited to participate in the discussions and activities that will define a positive future for all. We are at the cusp of the expansion of our human consciousness, beyond the limitations of our past. Together, we can envision a world that embraces our human potential. Together, we can create a world that can truly work for all living beings.